Look at these 3 words written larger than the rest, with a special pride never written before or since. Tall words proudly saying, "We the people."
Hi folks, I'm Alexander Haberbush, president of the Lex Rex Institute, and I'm a practicing constitutional attorney, and today I'm going to be answering your questions about the law. As always, please keep in mind when watching this or any of our other videos that nothing in our YouTube videos constitutes legal advice. Seriously, don't use stuff that you heard on YouTube in accord with the law. It's not going to go well for you. You're just going to get in trouble, and you're going to make people not like you. So don't do it. Nothing in this video constitutes legal advice. Let's go ahead and take a look at this week's question. What makes something a hate crime? Now, I hate racism, but it sure sounds to me like thought police. How are they allowed to do that? All right, this week's question gets into the ever-popular issue of hate crimes. Very controversial area in law, very misunderstood area in law. I hear people saying all kinds of things about hate crimes that just are not true. So hopefully I'm going to clear up some of those misconceptions today. And I'm going to take this in sort of 2 steps. First step is going to be explaining what hate crimes are, where they come from, why we have them. And then second step is going to be explaining whether or not I think hate crimes are a good way of handling the problem. Spoiler alert. I don't really think they're the best way of handling the problem, but maybe not for the reasons that you might think. And I actually don't think they're as ridiculous as you might think either, though I don't ultimately agree with them. I think that, I want to make their fair case. So let's do that. Hate crimes, where do they come from? Well, in a U.S. context at least, first hate crimes are going to go onto the books in 1968. That's for federal, as far as federal law is concerned. And that's actually still on the books today. It's codified in 18 U.S. Code, Section 249. It's part of the Civil Rights Act. And what that does is, well, let's pull it up. I can show you guys right now. So 2 main sections, this one right here and then this one down here. And what these do is they create basically more severe sentences. They create sentence enhancements where you can see right here where bodily injury is either caused or where someone attempts to cause bodily injury on the basis of either actual or perceived race, color, religion, or national origin. And then this one also adds gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. So significantly, part to keep in mind is it applies when someone causes bodily injury or using one of these implements, ones listed here, attempts to cause bodily injury. So that is the federal law on hate crimes. As you can imagine, states begin to follow suit and proliferate their own hate crime statutes in the years shortly thereafter. I believe the first to do so is California in 1978, in again a section that's still on the books. That's going to be section 190.2 of the California Penal Code. And what that one does is it provides sentence enhancements, so more severe sentences for murders, when those murders are motivated by prejudice against 14th Amendment protected classes, basically. If you don't know what that is, you can watch our video on balancing tests. I'm not going to get into it here. But basically, it's race, religion, color, or national origin. So again, worse punishments for murder when they're committed for one of those reasons. Now, I hear a lot of counter-arguments against hate crimes, and those counter-arguments tend to be something to the effect of, you shouldn't be punishing somebody's reason for committing a crime. You shouldn't punish motivation. When you do that, you're ultimately punishing belief. That's wrong. We shouldn't do that because we shouldn't have favored and disfavored views. I am sympathetic to part of that argument, but part of it really misses the boat. 25, 30 years, actually 30 years ago at this point, wouldn't have missed the boat, actually. It would have been right on point. But since that point, laws that purely legislate against somebody's beliefs or expression of those beliefs have been ruled unconstitutional. And that happened in a case called R.A.V. v. City of St. Paul. It's a 1992 Supreme Court case in which Justice Scalia wrote the opinion. And that dealt with a St. Paul law. Let's take a look at that law right now. Now, this is actually from the court's opinion because you can't find this law in the books anymore. It doesn't exist. It's been overruled. So here the opinion quotes the relevant law, and what that law does is it makes it illegal to place on public or private property an object, symbol, appellation, characterization of a burning cross or a Nazi swastika, or really any other similar symbol, which someone knows or has reasonable grounds to know arouses anger, alarm, or resentment in others on the basis of race, color, creed, religion, or gender. And then that person is going to be guilty of disorderly conduct and guilty of a misdemeanor because of it. So one thing you ought to notice right away, it's a pretty substantial difference between this and the ones that we already looked at. Remember, the California law had to do with murders that were motivated by one of these groups, whereas the federal law had to do with causing bodily injury or attempting to cause bodily injury because someone's a member of one of these groups. Well, this one, what's the actual act that's being punished? Well, placing a symbol on public or private property. Now, an alarm bell ought to be going off in your head right now, because when you place a symbol, what are you doing? Well, you're speaking. And that's obviously going to be subject to free speech protections. Remember, free speech, First Amendment protects both symbolic speech as well as regular, ordinary spoken language. Very clearly, this is symbolic speech, and the court, rightly in my opinion, ends up finding that this law is unconstitutional on the grounds of free speech. Now, again, I don't want to get too much into this today, but I think that opinion makes a great deal of sense. We don't have free speech to protect popular opinions. We have it to protect the unpopular ones. So even though racism, bigoted views may be very, very objectionable, abhorrent views to express, they're exactly the ones that we ought to be protecting, because they're the ones that people are likely to try to criminalize. And free speech means nothing if it doesn't apply to everybody. Lex Rex Institute will do anything in our power to defend people who have had their free speech rights violated. So if you know somebody, doesn't matter what they believe. They could be, maybe the speech that got banned was protesting the Lex Rex Institute. Doesn't matter to us. We'll still represent them. Have them give us a call. But anyway, rightly found unconstitutional. So 30 years ago, if you'd said that hate crimes were banning people's thought or expressive conduct, you might have been right. Nowadays, can no longer do that. They're all going to have an underlying crime and essentially work as what we call aggravating circumstances. What's an aggravating circumstance? Now, it doesn't mean that it makes you real angry. It means that it makes the crime more severe than it would otherwise be. Assault's a good example. So in criminal assault, we consider it aggravated assault if it is committed against a woman, a child, or a police officer. One of these things is not really like the others, but that's neither here nor there. Another one, actually probably a better example, is going to be murder. Even though we don't call first-degree murder aggravated murder, it's basically what it is, because common law murder is second-degree murder. Elements of that are killing of a human being with malice aforethought. So mental state required is malice aforethought. If somebody adds to that premeditation and deliberation, we punish it more severely. It's called first-degree murder. You've probably heard of different degrees of murder. That's what those are. That's what that means. So that's sort of what an aggravating circumstance is. It's the same crime, means all the elements of the underlying crime are met, plus something that makes it worse. And then in the case of both hate crimes as well as the murder example that I gave, it's going to be a mental state that makes it worse. Now, technically speaking, obviously, you're not going to be charged under the same statutory section for a hate crime. They have their own statutory sections, but functionally, they work a lot like aggravating circumstances. So do these make a lot of sense? Does it make sense to have hate crimes? Well, to answer that, I just want to give sort of the basics of what our law is about. So law is really about two kinds of things. It's about rights, and it's about wrongs. That's it. So rights are things that it's right for you to do, wrongs are things that it's wrong for you to do. And because we're a free society, a liberal society, and one that values freedom, we say that things that are prohibited must be expressly identified, and that's what our law does. Our law identifies the wrongs, and everything else is considered a right. Doesn't mean that it's a great thing for you to do, that you ought to be doing it, but it's within your rights to do anything that is not prohibited. So within the category of wrongs, you've got private wrongs and public wrongs. Private wrongs are wrongs committed, person to another. Public wrongs are ones in which society is in some way harmed, in which we've deemed that society has an interest in the outcome. So private wrongs are going to be things like the law of torts. What's the law of torts? Well, that's going to be things like negligence or trespass, wrongful death, conversion. What's conversion? Well, conversion is basically converting somebody's property to your own use. So if you loan me your car and I go and crash it into a tree and you can't use the car anymore, I have converted that car. As you can see, the wrong is just between you and me. If I crash your car, society doesn't really have any interest in that. Obviously, there are some things in which both individuals and society have an interest. That'd be, so look at the example of killing somebody. Criminally, we have the law against murder, but we also have somebody's ability to sue somebody else for wrongful death. So private wrongs are going to be resolved via a lawsuit. You have a remedy at law for that. You sue somebody to take care of that. Whereas crimes, public wrongs, those are going to be prosecuted by usually a prosecutor, somebody who's an employee of the state. But sort of, why do I explain this to you? Well, the reason I explain this is basically to show that any law that's on the books is one that at least theoretically, we're saying a wrongdoing has occurred, and it's a wrongdoing in which society has an interest, if it is indeed a public wrong, since that's what criminal acts are. So, what does that mean for hate crimes? Well, we've got to be able to show with a hate crime both that there is a societal interest in remedying whatever has occurred, and that whatever has occurred actually is indeed wrong. And obviously, I think these views are wrongful views. You know, people who have bigoted opinions, that's not great. We don't want that. Those are not opinions we want out there. But the more relevant part of this inquiry for our purposes is going to be whether or not we can remedy that as a wrong. So a lot of the arguments that I hear against hate crimes tend to be things like, well, they tend to be very utilitarian arguments, frankly. They tend to be things like, we'll get a better society if people don't have these views and aren't espousing these views. And I'm very skeptical of that. I don't think that it's appropriate for government to be policing people's thoughts. I mean, you can say it's only their thoughts when coupled with another criminal act, but even so, I think exacerbating that's a little bit dangerous when you try to tack that on as a mandatory thing for judges to do. Why is that? Well, something you may not know about criminal sentencing is that judges have pretty wide discretion when it comes to the sort of sentence they're going to give to a criminal defendant. There's very good reason for that. To explain that, let me give you an example. So I think right away people are already probably going to agree that if a crime is committed coolly and dispassionately, particularly, a really severe crime, it ought to be punished more harshly than if it's done in a fit of passion. If you sit down and say, I'm going to find a way that I can kill somebody because I want to know what murder feels like, we're going to punish that more severely than if you walk in and your wife's cheating on you and you in a fit of passion, you kill one of them. It's kind of heinous details and grisly details, but I think you get the point that I'm making here. But anyway, I'm going to use an example that I learned in law school about why you might want to give judges broad discretion when it comes to sentencing. So, remember the definition I gave of murder. Killing of a human being with malice aforethought. And first-degree murder is when that's done with premeditation and deliberation. So keep those in mind when listening to this story. So let's say there's a 16-year-old kid by the name of Johnny. And Johnny comes from a broken home. His mother was divorced. I guess his mother was never married to his father, actually. And recently his mother has married a new man. About 2 years ago, she got married to a new man. We'll call him Joe. So she's married to Joe now. And Joe is very, very abusive. He abuses Johnny's mom. He abuses Johnny's sister. And he abuses Johnny. He does this physically. He really injures them, harms them. One day, Johnny comes home from school. It's about 3:30 in the afternoon. And he walks in, and Joe has his mom by the wrist, and he's twisted her wrist. He's actually broken her arm. And now the mom is sort of in the corner on the floor in the kitchen. She's crying. Joe's shouting at her. He's hitting her. And Johnny, he's had enough of this. He can't put up with this. So he gets between his mom and Joe. And lo and behold, Joe's wrath now turns on Johnny. I mean, he hits Johnny. He's a much bigger man than Johnny is. And Johnny kind of cowers and he pulls back. And Joe says, I'm leaving for an hour. I'll be back in 1 hour. You'd better not be here when I get back, or there's going to be hell to pay for it. And Johnny knows that's true. He knows that his dad really means that. He knows his dad's going off to drink at the bar for an hour. Or his stepdad, rather, is going off to drink at the bar for an hour, and that he will be back and that he means what he said. So Johnny sits down, and he thinks about it, and he devises a plan. He thinks to himself, my mom's not going to defend herself. I have to defend her. I know my sister can't defend herself. She's only 10. And so I got to figure something out, because when my dad says there'll be hell to pay, he means my sister is going to be the one to pay it. I know that's true. So what Johnny does is he calls up his friend who he knows has a gun. He asks to borrow that gun. We won't get into accomplice liability today. That's a whole other issue. But he goes to his friend's house. He gets the gun. He comes back, grabs a newspaper, puts it on the kitchen counter, because the front door is right by the kitchen counter. You can see it from the kitchen counter. Puts the gun on the counter, puts the newspaper over it, and he holds the gun underneath the newspaper. He waits for his dad to come back in. He knows he's going to come back in an hour after when he said he would. So Johnny waits there for maybe 15 minutes. And his dad finally does come back through the door. I keep saying dad. His stepdad comes back through the door. Johnny shoots him, killing him. What's Johnny liable for? The answer is first-degree murder. That's just, in fact, the answer. That's what Johnny is guilty of in these circumstances. It was not committed under the heat of passion. Johnny had time to devise a plan. It was very clearly premeditated. So first-degree murder is what he's liable for. Now, you might say he has a defense that he can use of defending others or defending himself. Yeah, not really, because for those to apply, there has to be an imminent threat of harm to those people. As we mentioned, Johnny's stepdad said he was going to be back in an hour, and he's not currently. He doesn't have his fist raised up to Johnny's mom right now or Johnny's sister right now, so it's not technically imminent. Johnny is guilty of first-degree murder. Don't you think the judge ought to have a little bit of discretion in the sentencing? Because you can't find Johnny not guilty for this. Johnny is guilty of this. I guess jury could nullify it. That's always an option. But short of that, if the jury does its duty and actually finds Johnny's liable for murder here, first-degree murder, not a lot the judge can do other than give Johnny a lighter sentence. You want judges to be able to do that. Now, what sort of circumstances could there possibly be where somebody's done something horribly racist and committed a horrible crime because they are a bigot? Well, it's not that hard to think of examples, really. I mean, think of, have another hypothetical here. So there's a kid named Timmy. I guess it's not a kid anymore. He's a grown-up now. But back when he was 5 years old, he was kidnapped by a cult. And this cult abused him for his whole childhood. Finally, he got away. Now he has a good life, stable job. He's married. But I guess it turns out that Timmy's wife was not all that happy because Timmy's wife, well, behind his back, she has decided to cheat on him. And Timmy comes home early one day and he catches his wife cheating on him. And lo and behold, she's cheating on him with a member of this cult that had kidnapped him when he was a kid. Johnny knows this because I guess everybody in this cult, maybe they wear a special robe. And I guess they never take it off because he's wearing the robe when Timmy comes in and sees that. So Timmy, in a fit of passion, kills this man. Now, obviously, this was, as I just mentioned, it's a crime committed in a fit of passion. Obviously, I think that it's understandable that Johnny would have some animus toward this group of people. They committed horrible offenses against him when he was a kid, and now to see his wife in a compromised situation with somebody who's a member of this group is something that obviously makes Johnny more heated, makes Johnny more likely to commit a crime of passion like this. You might even say that the fact that this person was a member of that cult and that Johnny has animus toward that cult actually makes his crime less severe. So when you prescribe certain mandatory enhancements to a punishment as a result of having a particular motivation for a crime, what you're really doing is you're stripping a judge of the ability to weigh those facts and circumstances and arrive at an outcome that makes sense for those facts and circumstances. Even more importantly than that, there's a second reason why I think hate crimes aren't a good idea. And that has to do with who writes the laws in the first place. Who writes the hate crimes? Well, who does write those? Turns out it's the same folks that write all of our crimes: legislators, members of Congress, members of the state legislature. Well, who are those people? Well, by definition, they are people who are politically powerful because they're people in positions of political influence. So when you say that somebody ought to have a particular right because they are a member of a group, it's a little bit dangerous to have the people in power being the ones that are deciding that, because there could be groups that are equally as significant to somebody's life and outlook and equally important as the ones that they included that they just, for whatever reason, didn't think to include. We tend to think within whatever narrow window we're used to interacting. When people in power are thinking in the narrow windows that they are used to interacting, well, that can end up favoring people in power. Presumably the entire reason for having a hate crime in the first place is that you want to protect people who are not in power. So it can end up being directly counterproductive of that. Let me give you an example of what I mean. So obviously I think everybody would agree that whether or not someone is a Dodger fan is just as important as a person's religion or race. It's a joke, obviously that's not as important, but something else that is actually very important is, well, think of an example, is whether or not somebody is a member of an Indian tribe, a Native American tribe. You're called Indian under the law. Sorry, I don't mean to be offensive to anybody, but that's law tends to refer to them as Indians because that's what the Constitution uses, but a member of Native American tribe. Now you might say, well, that's race. Well, sometimes, but not always. Remember Liz Warren, when she tried to say that she was a Cherokee a few years back, because she was 1/512th or 1/128th Cherokee or whatever it was, Cherokee Nation responded back, no, we do not determine tribal membership in the Cherokee Nation by whether somebody has the blood of a Cherokee. We have our own criteria for determining that. And of course, we do allow that because tribes are sovereign in the United States. There is tribal sovereignty wherever we have Indian reservations, and they can pick their own criteria for determining who is and is not a tribal member. So it may not be race. And I don't doubt that plenty of attorneys may argue that, but it's strictly speaking not the case in most instances. But we can certainly conceive of crime that is motivated by somebody's membership in an Indian tribe. It's happened, even Washington talked about crimes that were motivated by whether or not somebody was a Native American. So it's been going on for a while. We're well aware of that. For whatever reason, that tends not to be something that our law recognizes as a protected status. Maybe it's because there aren't a whole lot of Native Americans in Congress or the state legislatures. I don't know, but that's just one example. Now, I almost hate to admit this, but I'm somebody who directly interfaces with the law too, so I'm one of those people who's legally in power. I'm probably not going to think of every category that may be significant, but I've given you one of them. I'm sure you can think of plenty of others that may be equally as important as race or religion or gender or the rest of them. The thing to keep in mind here is that when you decide to recognize some of these groups and give them special protections, make crimes more severe when they're committed against these groups, you've created groups of people who are favored over and against other disfavored groups of people. That's a very dangerous thing to do. If you're a student of history, you may know that the Saxon law worked exactly that way. You had the thing that was basically the man guilt for when you committed a crime, and it was more severe if it was committed against somebody with property versus somebody that was a free man versus a slave. That's something we did away with. I think it was gone by the time the Battle of Hastings rolled around. So that's been gone for 1,000 years at this point. Let's not go back to it. Equality before the law is a very new thing, and it's a very important thing. It's not something we should get rid of just because we think that, well, really, even if we have very, very substantial and important reasons to get rid of it, it's still something we ought to think very carefully about before throwing it out. So that's the way the hate crimes work. That's my opinion on hate crimes, and those are sort of the reasons why I don't think they're a great idea. Hopefully that answers your question. We ended up going long, as we tend to in these videos. I'm sorry about that. You got to ask me shorter questions if you want shorter answers, but it's neither here nor there, I suppose. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to click like and click subscribe and click on the bell icon for notifications. I think that's everything you're supposed to do on YouTube. If you do feel moved to contribute to the Lex Rex Institute, you can do that, lexrex.org/donate. We really appreciate your donations. They go directly to defending people's free speech rights, and that's something you can't put a price tag on that. So if you do feel moved to donate, please do that. Again, I hope you enjoyed this. This has been a presentation of the Lex Rex Institute. See you folks again next week. Thank you very much for watching.